and welcome to this special Procurement Act podcast mini-series brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. This series is supported by Procurement Hub. Hello, and thank you for joining us on the first of 4 special episodes of this CIPS mini-series. With the go-live date of the Procurement Act incoming, we've partnered with Procurement Hub, part of Places for People, to deep dive into some of the key elements of the Act and what it means to public sector contracting authorities in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. To put the importance of the Act into context, the public sector is estimated to spend around $300 billion a year on public procurement, and the UK government believes the new legislation will revolutionise how the public sector spends this money. Following an announcement in Parliament in September, the Procurement Act's new go-live date is now the 24th of February 2025, pushed back from its original date of the 28th of October. This will give the new Labour government time to rework the National Procurement Policy Statement. In this first episode, we explore the motivations behind the Act and set the scene with Lindsay Maguire from the Cabinet Office and Alan Heron, Director of Procurement at Places for People. Then, in episodes 2, 3 and 4, we'll focus on the 3 core areas of change expected as a result of the Act: transparency, integrity and opening up of public sector procurement. Alan will also join me throughout these episodes, as well as Rebecca Rees, Head of Public Procurement at Trowers and Hamlins. We're going to keep each episode short and snappy, but filled with insight, so let's get going. So welcome to today's guests, Alan Heron and Lindsay Maguire. Great to have you joining us. Alan has over 25 years of experience in both public and private sector procurement, is currently Director of Procurement at Places for People, and is a Fellow of CIPS. He's had numerous strategic roles throughout his career and is a passionate ambassador for all things procurement. Lindsay is Head of Engagement for the procurement team at the Cabinet Office. She joined the Government Commercial Organisation in 2016 after 10 years in the private sector, initially working as a senior category leader for employment and labour market in the DWP, and subsequently as Head of Small Business Policy at the Cabinet Office, working with all central government departments and SMEs to break down barriers to entry. So, Lindsay, we'll come to you in a sec to give us the Cabinet Office perspective. But Alan, given you'll be joining us throughout this series, let's start with a brief thought from you. As a practitioner, can you summarise what you think the Procurement Act means for UK public sector procurement?
As a practitioner, probably the first thing I want to say is a thank you to Lindsay and the team, because I can't underline how gargantuan a task this exercise was. And it's been completely relentless for the last couple of years, I'm sure, for Lindsay and the team. But we've managed to get to a position now where we've got the new legislation ahead of us, and we are looking forward to quite a tsunami of change moving forward. And to some degree, it's a thankless task, because Lindsay and the Cabinet Office are going to prepare some legislation which is bound to never please everyone. But that's the impossible task. But we're moving forward, and I think that the new legislation does offer some fantastic opportunities for diversification from what we had previously. I think it's only right and proper that the legislation continues to evolve, because this is the first legislation we've had really since post-COVID, and the world has changed significantly, markets have changed significantly, supply chains. So it's only right that we have legislation that's reflective of where we are today in the world. And I think this new legislation gives us the chance to do just that. But it comes with quite a number of changes, and probably the biggest underpinning change in terms of the legislation is the drive for transparency, which I completely agree with. I think it'll be interesting to see the practicalities of how that balances out with the practical implications of delivering that transparency in terms of the administration that comes with it, and with it the sheer number of contract notices, for example, is going to be a challenge for some. But we have to move forward to some degree in terms of transparency, and I think we'll manage to make this work. I think it might need some tweaking from a practitioner's perspective, but as everything, we will move forward with that. I think the opportunities for creativity, and that sounds like a taboo word with procurement, but it's not. I think the competitive flexible procedure brings with it the the opportunity for us to be more creative and reflective of the world in which we operate now. And I think, something like that in particular is a key highlight for me. But like everything else, there are some things in the act that I'm really looking forward to. There are some things in the act that I'm a little bit more hesitant about. I think the open framework. I think I'm yet to be sort of convinced on the merits of that to some degree in terms of the practical implications. But overall, it's a really, really exciting time. There is so much change coming down the pipeline for us all, and I think this legislation gives a real opportunity for procurement professionals to be at the top table talking about things that are going to impact our businesses and deliver value back into the sector. So exciting times ahead.
Yeah, really exciting times. A lot of change for everybody, but hopefully very positive. Lindsay, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you on. As Alan has already mentioned, so much work has gone into pulling all of this together. So let's start by setting the scene. Can you give us a brief overview of the Procurement Act and its purpose, and what were some of the motivations, I guess, behind the Act itself?
I won't take you back throughout the whole of the last 5 years because we've only got 45 minutes and all of that will take a lot longer. But this is very much kind of a post-EU exit piece of legislation. Public procurement is regulated. It's also a significant part of our trade agreements, our international trade agreements. But our current regulations are based on the EU. So they were written with the single market in mind. So this is an opportunity to look at how we can make sure procurement is delivering for the UK now that we've left the European Union. So at the start, we kind of looked at it as an opportunity to tackle some of the challenges that were with the previous legislation. And that includes things like, as Alan said, being a bit more creative and working closer with the marketplace on driving that commercial flexibility. So taking away a very procedural, very process-driven approach, very, some would say stagnant, some would say kind of slightly frustrating when it comes to actually driving outcomes, and transforming that into something which was a lot more flexible, but also a lot more suitable to work with the market in delivering that benefit. The other thing that we wanted to do was try and open up public procurement a bit. So we often get quite a lot of criticism as practitioners, but also in our role as Cabinet Office, that public sector supply chains are too bureaucratic. It's not clear where suppliers can bid into. There's too many barriers to smaller businesses and to social enterprises. So this was an opportunity to look at where some of those barriers are and to try and remove some of them, and really encourage new entrants into the public sector marketplace to see this as being a viable opportunity. I like to describe our role in Cabinet Office as being balancing the interests of the public sector and the private sector. So obviously, on one hand, we want to make it a lot more efficient and flexible for procurement teams that are doing the work. But on the other, there is a huge opportunity here to drive some of those economic growth measures by encouraging small businesses to bid into supply chains. The other thing that we wanted to do was make it a lot easier and a lot clearer around excluding suppliers that are posing unacceptable risks. So it's absolutely the case that we shouldn't be spending taxpayers' money on businesses that are presenting sort of unacceptable risks to ourselves as buyers. So the exclusions regime, whilst it is on the more technical side of the actual legislation, is quite important because it brings a lot of those parameters into English law and Scottish law and really sets the scene for what we want procurement to be going forward. So it provides lots of powers, debarment registers, new oversight procedures. All of this is really important to making sure that we're protecting those supply chains. And finally, as Alan's mentioned, transparency is really important. So this is an opportunity for us to be a lot more transparent about what we're procuring, but not just at the beginning of the life cycle, all the way through. So we often get a bit of criticism that we're kind of quite transparent in the procurement phase, but as you follow things through, it becomes less so. So it's quite difficult for businesses then to interrupt, kind of long-term contracts where there are incumbents on those contracts. So we want to have that transparency be embedded throughout the whole of the regime. the thing that will really be make a difference for this transparency. And I do understand that there's some concern around levels of admin and level of burden, is our central digital platform, which will hold all of this information, hold all of those notices, will all be kind of in a common readable format. So one of the things that we really haven't looked at or kind of really spoken about is just the sheer amount of data that will be available for us all. So not just for sort of ourselves as procurement teams, but as taxpayers, we'll be able to go in and kind of analyse how money is being spent. And I genuinely think there is a huge opportunity there to be a lot more savvy around some of the commercial aspects of that data, where perhaps we can do a bit benchmarking, perhaps we can kind of compare what suppliers are telling us, we can look at what parts of the public sector are procuring specific services. And by having access to that data, we can really sort of drive some long-term change around that. I do understand the burdens and I do understand the hesitancy, but there is a long-term vision here around that transparency. And I feel, obviously I would say this, I'm a bit biased, but I think we've probably got that balance right. And I'm really interested to see how that's going to develop as we go forward.
Absolutely. I think what comes through for me is that from the Act is that I think procurement people will be able to pull more of their commercial levers that they perhaps felt they haven't been able to before. And having access to all of this data and information will only enable them to make more informed commercial decisions. So hopefully that's a great opportunity. That overshone with the fact that the public eye is often on public sector spend, because people want to know where their tax money is going, where the public's purse is being spent. So I imagine the increase in transparency is welcomed. I understand the concerns around increased admin, but like you say, hopefully it will help people make better informed decisions. Building on that, Lindsay, can you clarify for listeners when the go live date is, what the implementation period looks like, and any key dates people that need to know about with updates, etc.?
Our original go live date was in October 2024. Obviously, we had an election, which was called in May, and a change of government in July. So since then, we've been working quite closely with ministers to understand what their drivers are for procurement. Procurement is incredibly important in the delivery of the kind of country's growth missions. And they're really keen to essentially set out what the strategic priorities for public procurement are through the National Procurement Policy Statement, which is a mechanism within the legislation. So based on that, and based on the fact that it's a new government and ministers are really keen to do a bit more engagement around those priorities, we took the decision to delay the implementation of the Act to February 2025. So the current date is 24th of February 2025. Now, nothing is changing in terms of the content. So we're not going out with anything new. So the training is still absolutely valid. If people are signed up to do their training, absolutely still required. Nothing is changing in terms of the content. What may change is obviously our strategic priorities, and it's right that we spend a bit of time considering that. We are looking at how best we engage with all of our stakeholders on ensuring that the strategic priorities are right for everyone. So just because they're right for sort of central government doesn't necessarily mean that they're the right kind of priorities for the wider public sector. And as Alan mentioned, we've always been really keen on engaging quite widely with stakeholders, both in the private sector and in the public sector, to make sure that we've got that balance right. So we're going to generate a new NPPS, National Procurement Policy Statement, and we'll go live with that in February. Nothing else is changing, so the digital baseline will be the same. What we are going to do is we are going to do a bit more testing on the central digital platform. All of that will come. We have some comms ready to go. We have a campaign which we're going to launch with our suppliers, so marketplaces, basically getting everyone up to speed on where we are. We did have to take a bit of a pause around some of our comms because of the election, but we're now in a position where we've got some really clear milestones over the next couple of months.
Yeah, that's good to know, and I think that's people are reassured that nothing's actually going to change from the Act. It's this repositioning. So full steam ahead on everything that people have been preparing. Carry on with that. So, what would your advice be for those procurement professionals who the Act is affecting? And I guess that's public sector and the private sector, really. Both. How should they prepare, and what kind of support is available from the Cabinet Office?
We took a decision quite early on that if we were going to embed this change, we would want to put resources and support around it. So we've got very detailed learning and development. There's a series of knowledge drops for suppliers. There is a 10-hour e-learning with accreditation available. There's 3 days of deep dives for people that really want to get stuck into the detail, and those are proving very popular. So we are very, very impressed and quite overwhelmed actually with the take up on that learning and development from the public sector. I genuinely think it's a credit to our function, just how willing people have been to engage in the ideas, to come with us, to spend time getting up to speed on what we're driving through the legislation. And that's been really impressive. Alongside that, we've been running some successful communities of practice. So practitioners have been coming together on a fairly regular basis, weekly basis at the moment, to have a deeper dive into particular topics of interest. And there's been some really great innovative ideas which I've seen floating around, which I'm really keen that contracting authorities consider. There's a couple of things on my radar which I think are quite interesting. So away from the sort of standard package of information that we're kind of rolling out to everyone, I've also had quite a few conversations with sort of senior procurement leaders in particular about the difference between cultural and legislative change. So whilst we've got new legislation, and whilst compliance is obviously important, and we've got a new regime and a new technical framework for procurement, I do think this is also an opportunity to look at maybe some of the barriers that might exist for procurement, regardless of the legislation, and also look at whether there are better ways, more efficient ways of doing things, and really sort of taking this as a moment for our function. And some organisations have done this brilliantly. So some organisations have taken this as essentially a bit of a catalyst to look at how procurement is positioned in the organisation, and whether the resources are correct, whether the capacity is correct, and whether there is anything else that we can do to reposition it. And I think that's a huge opportunity. And one thing I've always said about this programme is that it's about long-term change. So whilst the new regulations will be switched on 25th of February 2025, it's not necessarily the work that happens on 25th of February 2025 that's going to be of interest. It's going to be the long-term change that this commercial creativity and flexibility is going to drive. And I think that's what Alan mentioned about how we can think a bit differently in terms of working with the marketplace on this. And it's a huge opportunity, but it's not one that is going to be, switch it on and it's going to be visible straight away. It's something that will require a bit of behavioural change, and a bit of driving forward for our function. But I have seen quite a lot of that, and I've been hugely impressed with how people have kind of got stuck into sort of navigating some of that flexibility.
Yeah, I've had similar conversations as well. Like the appetite for change is really, it seems that this is a really exciting opportunity. And I think with any big change and transformation program, which ultimately this is, it's people, systems, and processes, isn't it? And hearts and minds and a culture change is probably as important, if not more important, than everything else. Bringing people along on this journey and opening their eyes to kind of what the art of the possible is, I guess, and a real change in the way that we're operating. So that's really great to hear that some people are really driving forward on that. And what about for suppliers? Where can they get help?
We've got a short series of knowledge drops which introduce the ideas to the suppliers, and we have tried to make all of our guidance and learning development and everything available on gov.uk. So we've been quite transparent about how we are teaching our procurement teams. We've got a bit more to do with suppliers on targeted comms. I think not that many of the sort of smaller suppliers are engaged and have heard of us. What I will say is that there is definitely an opportunity here for the market to work with customers on developing outcomes and thinking flexibly. We want to promote more pre-market engagement, so more events, more kind of sort of joint development of ideas and potential procurement outcomes. So there's lots more that we can do. Obviously, the election, as I say, kind of sort of put a pause on some of our activity, but we'll be ramping that up over the next 2 months. So if you are a supplier to the public sector, or if you do want to be a supplier to the public sector, I'd probably just say look out for lots of stuff which is coming. So a lot of the trade organisations have also, done their own events and their own guides and sort of have a read and engage with the legislation, see what it means. We'll also be launching a new supplier information and registration system, essentially, which will hold a lot of your supplier information. So we'll come out on that with more sort of requirements as to what that means. But all of this should be seen quite positively by the marketplace.
Absolutely. Alan, how have you been preparing? What's your experience and what would your advice be for other public sector practitioners?
I think, first of all, Lindsay made a very good point about the fact that we shouldn't just limit ourselves to the functional and legislative changes that the Act is going to bring for us. I think this is a real opportunity for cultural change. It can really reposition how procurement is regarded within our various organisations and sectors. It can really change our relationship with our stakeholders and suppliers. This is a real opportunity for us to just improve as a function. So I think we should really consider that and all the changes that are we're preparing for. But in terms of preparation, I must admit the resources that have been made available to the Cabinet Office are very good indeed. There's the e-learning sessions, which I've been through all of those. I think there's 8 or 10 of them, I think. And then for those that want to go a little bit deeper, there are the deep dive sessions, which is a 3-day interactive session with other procurement professionals, discussing some quite key aspects of the Act in a bit more of a realistic situation, which is, for a geek like me, it was living the dream for 3 days. It was great. I thoroughly enjoyed that. But I think fundamentally, people really need to make the most of all the resources that are available, and there are lots of really good resources. They really need to read the Act, just read the Act and try and understand it. And if you don't understand it, ask questions, have conversations, reach out to other procurement professionals. There's loads of advice and people willing to talk. The communities of practice that Lindsay mentioned are a great example of, people just airing their concerns or questions and resolving them and being able to move forward with a bit of clarity. So use all the resources that are available. Other than that, I think you also have to look internally at your own organisation. How are you structured? How are you positioned to be able to deliver against the demands of the Procurement Act? We've touched upon some of the administrative requirements. They are quite onerous, and I think they will affect different organisations in different ways. We have to look at the systems that we have, the technology we're using. There are requirements like disclosing any payments over £30,000. Do we have the systems and the technology to be able to identify those payments? Can we identify which are related to public sector contracts and which aren't? So we just need to understand where we are today in terms of our operational functionality and where we need to be by the time that the Act is fully implemented. So there's quite a lot to consider. And I think that it's not just looking at the legislation. We have to look internally at our own organisations and how we're structured and how we're prepared for the Act as well. But just before I close, I just want to say a thank you to Lindsay for delaying the Procurement Act to the 24th of February, because that's my birthday. And as a procurement geek, I truly will be living the dream on my birthday. So I'll raise a glass to her.
Nice present for you. So, Lindsay, there's lots that we can do in the short term, but what's the long-term hope for the big changes in the way that public procurement is carried out as a result of the Act? What's the long-term vision?
So I think the flexibility is really going to be quite key. So it's been quite interesting getting the balance right on this. So there's lots of things that we do buy, which is quite tactical, quite price driven, and I think that's absolutely fine. That can continue. Nothing's going to sort of change in that space. There's no point in going through huge amounts of change in markets and sectors that are working quite well, or as I say, kind of quite tactical. But where I really want to see a long-term vision is opening up a bit more competition and flexibility in maybe some slightly trickier markets. Now, obviously, this is a long-term goal. It would be great if we had more access to small businesses. So if in 5 years' time we can actually pinpoint that some of the reduction in barriers, is working, that would be great. And not just because we might have better data, also we're doing procurement slightly better. I think there is a huge opportunity for innovation in procurement, especially in the context of tackling some of the bigger issues that we've got at the moment. So climate innovation, for example, there's some great kind of projects ongoing, which are so innovative that a solution doesn't already exist in the marketplace, and this is where the long-term vision of that flexibility really comes to light. So if there's a way of contracting for that innovation and contracting with a marketplace to help deliver against some of those real challenges for the country, I think that's huge. As Alan said, kind of this is an opportunity to sort of drive commercial capability as well. I have genuinely been really impressed as to how much people are getting stuck in on the training, but also comparing ideas. So the training that I went on, there was an example that we ran through about, I think it was about kind of moving sort of trees from the side of a railway. And there was someone actually from a completely different sector on my training who had literally just done that as a contract in the real world. And so was able to say, oh, yeah, this is what we did. This is how it worked in practice. This is where it would have worked better. So having that kind of cross-sector, deep procurement expertise and conversations, I think is great. There's so much good practice that we work on. We don't always share that. We don't always think to sort of pick up the phone to someone in a slightly different sector in the same location and have those conversations. So that collaboration for me has always been quite important. And I think this is a good opportunity to do it whilst we're all sort of implementing the same change. I've mentioned this, but I also do think the data is going to be really important. And there are several quite live use cases actually, where if we had access to all of the spend through procurement, we could very quickly identify any contracts that might be of risk of things like insolvency, or, to give another example, when Russia invaded Ukraine, being able to go and identify very quickly where there was potential Russian-owned companies in our supply chain as a country is really, really powerful and really useful. I also think benchmarking, pricing, looking at what other people are doing, taking a sector level approach on some of those ideas will become much easier using that data. So I do fully understand about, it will take a little while to get there, but having that bank of information is going to be quite key.
Thank you both. Really useful overview there and sets us up nicely for this series. Lindsay, I'm aware of all the work going into the training sessions coming out of the Cabinet Office on the Act, so good luck with the delivery and ahead of the go-live date. Alan, looking forward to having you join us for the remainder of this series. Lots to cover.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, Alan.
So that's it from this first episode of this 4-part mini-series. As a reminder, the remaining episodes will focus on specific outcomes of the Procurement Act. So stick with us. Next episode will be delving into transparency in public sector procurement. Thank you to Procurement Hub for supporting this CIPS Futures series. Part of Places for People, Procurement Hub are a commercially sensitive procurement consortium with giving back and social purpose at the forefront. And don't forget, do have a listen to the main CIPS Futures podcast series, where we interview leading minds and innovators in the profession. This podcast has been brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. For more information on CIPS, head over to cips.org, where you can find out about our upcoming events and exciting training opportunities on offer. That's it from us. See you next time.